Okay, thank you, Carla. Good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to our Lodi Optimist Candidate Forum, featuring the 42nd State Assembly District candidates. To my far left is George Ferrer. George is from Doylestown. He is the Democratic candidate. And to my immediate left is Keith Ripp. Keith is from Dane, and he is representing the Republican Party here today. As you know, we typically have students here. We run into a bit of a scheduling snafu, and I don't know that they'll be here today. We expect them. This is the first of 3 forums that we will be running. The next forum on the 12th is an open forum, essentially, to discuss the school referendum. And then on the 19th, we have state Senate candidates. Luther Olson and Brian Smith will be coming here on the 19th. So you might want to mark those dates as well. Our format here today, each candidate will deliver a 2-minute opening statement. Then we'll open it to the audience for questions that you have. Vince is our man with the mic. He will hand the microphone to people who want to ask questions. Please identify yourself and ask a good question and be specific about your question without making statements too much. We want to hear from the candidates. So without any further ado, pardon me? Oh, great. Just like in the theater. This is a great opportunity for all of you to turn off those phones and listening devices. Oh, good work, Keith. Thank you. Since you're hot, Keith, why don't you lead off with the opening statements? He has 2 minutes. And I should say that the official timer is Jan out my wife, and she will hold up cards to indicate how much time is remaining at the 15-second and stop interval. So with no further ado, we'll begin with opening statement from Keith Ripp. Keith?
Well, in committee meetings, if your phone goes off, you're supposed to buy lunch. First, I'd like to start out by thanking the Optimists for holding the forum here today. Also the high school for allowing us to use the facilities, and then for the folks coming out today. Great to see a good turnout. For the past 8 years, I've been honored to serve my rural constituents of the 42nd Assembly District, because I've lived here my entire life. I was born and raised on my family farm just outside of Lodi. And it is here that I learned the true value of hard work. Today I'm proud to own and operate the same farm with my wife Lori, as we continue to live here and serve our local community. Over the last 8 years, I worked hard with members from both political parties to successfully move Wisconsin forward. Wisconsin now ranks 6th in the nation for wage growth, 3rd in the nation for high school graduation. By increasing tuition rates and affordable top-notch college education at any of the Wisconsin universities is now possible for all students. We've lowered our property taxes. We have the lowest unemployment rate since 2001. Wisconsin is a better place to live, work, and raise a family because of these achievements, but there are still more things to do. The residents of the rural assembly district understand there are unique challenges. Our neighbors and friends struggle with access to quality health professionals, reliable high-speed internet, adequately funded schools, and well-maintained roads. This past session, I joined with my fellow rural legislators to organize the Rural Wisconsin Initiative to focus on these needs. Healthcare, education, agriculture, and transportation are very vital to our everyday lives, and I will remain committed to finding solutions for these rural problems.
My name is George Ferrer, and I'm candidate for State Assembly here in District 42. I also would like to thank the Optimists for hosting this event and for everyone who's turned out. It's always both edifying and humbling to see citizens who are interested and engaged in the political process. So again, thank you. I am currently a resident of Doylestown in East Central Columbia County, but by background, I come from a military family. My father was a career military man. I was born on a military base. My grandfather was a career military man as well. and my great-grandfather, an Irish immigrant, also served in the U.S. military. I myself have served 8 years active service, beginning in 1971, and I followed that up with 18 years in the Reserves and National Guard, finishing up in the Wisconsin Air Guard a few years ago. I'm an engineer by background. I've spent many years in Wisconsin industry, about 25 of those building large diesel engines in Beloit. More recently, I have begun public service. I served 2 terms as village president in Doylestown, where I remain on the village board. I have experiences, strengths, and skills that will be useful to the state of Wisconsin and to District 42 going forward. We live in a challenging era. We have immediate challenges with our roads, funding our schools, ensuring that our water is protected, protecting local control. I'm aware of all these things and have plans and policies that will help us preserve them all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. That concludes our opening statements, and now we ask for questions from audience members. Yes, sir. And again, we ask that you identify yourself and please ask a relatively brief, direct question. Thank you.
My name is John Wilson. I'm from the town of Dane. I don't think it's any secret that Wisconsin's roads are in the bottom 5 nationally, that we're borrowing money every budget that we have no intent to ever pay back, and that there is not a sustainable model for supporting road construction and road maintenance. Should whichever one of you gets elected, can you tell me what your plan is for a sustainable model to fund roads and to pay back the debt?
Mr. Farrer, you are the first to respond.
Sure. I think any of us who spend any time on local roads understand that we have a compelling challenge. Our town roads, our village roads, our county roads, and our state roads are all quickly reaching an advanced stage of disrepair. In many cases, no longer repairable by conventional maintenance means. Many roads will have to be reconstructed. I've developed a plan that I call the Plan to Restore, the Budget to Build, the Plan to Maintain program. And it envisions 2 parallel paths. One, to evaluate the scope of the crisis. You can't manage a problem if you can't measure it. The second arm of this plan is direct action. We need to begin repairing our roads immediately using available resources. And we need to look everywhere. Certainly the planned audit of the Transportation Department may offer us some opportunities, but given the magnitude of the problem, with a forecast $1 billion shortfall in the near term in terms of transportation, the audit won't solve our problems. We need to explore other opportunities, to include using our prudent reserve, the rainy day fund. If you've driven on Route 60 between Arlington and Lodi, I think you understand that this is a rainy day. So every possibility of funding our roads needs to be pursued. Thank you.
Well, certainly we look back at the history on transportation. It began in the early 2000s. The previous administration rated the transportation fund $1.3 billion at a critical time when we needed to start rebuilding and maintaining our infrastructure. Instead, funds were depleted, taken away from that. As was mentioned, we're looking at the audit coming at the end of the year. I think that'll point out some things. We're also talking with DOT, how they can streamline some of their processes. For example, they'll pick a project and they'll stick a lot of dollars or spend a lot of money into engineering. And that project may or may not ever happen. So we're asking them to look at how are they able to do preliminary engineering, save those dollars until we know that the project is going to move forward, then start engineering more. There is always a level of engineering that needs to be done. Early in my career, Highway 51 project was going to be delayed again. We were able to keep that project. That was a enumerated project from DOT. We were able to keep that project on time and on schedule. we're always looking for, even with my farm business, short-term, long-term plans we needed to have in place, and also ensuring the least amount of financial impact on the Wisconsin families, because our residents are already taxed, heavily taxed. Thanks.
Next question directed first to Keith Tripp.
Oh, yes. A couple of years ago, there was a study, I was a legislative study committee that dealt with transportation and transportation funding. It was recognized at that time. There were several recommendations in that report that were brought forth to the current legislature and gathered dust. What's your position on those recommendations, such as registration fees, gas tax, county or local sales tax, to go to funding transportation?
That was a study committee that the governor put together. Like you said, it is on the shelf collecting dust, but that is still something that we maintain, that is an option to stay on. I don't think that microphone's turned on. Because we're truly going to sell that. We're starting out with a $939 million deficit. So we need to have all options on. Recently, we had Just Fix It campaign had meetings last week in 71 counties. By attending one of those meetings, heard and learned from the highway commissioner in Columbia County. They're 12 years behind on projects. It's going to take them that long to catch up at the current funding formula. So we need to come up with all those options, and I asked the governor to keep those options on the table. My colleagues, I've also met with many of our colleagues in my house, and we've gotten them, I think, point out the importance of tourism, agriculture, manufacturing in the state of Wisconsin, and I think most of them are on board, and I think our house is ready to move and take some action on this issue.
A brief interruption. I just heard from my technical consultant who recommends a new microphone.
Am I good to go with this one?
Yes.
So, yes, 2 years ago, Representative Rick and I sat at this table and answered some of these same questions about transportation. And one of them involved the options available to properly fund the transportation fund. The transportation fund itself is now constitutionally protected. It's a segregated fund, and when monies are put into it, they can't be used for other things, which will preclude any future depletions of the type that happened during the financial crisis. That said, we are confronting a new and different deficit of $900 million, which requires immediate attention. The options that were put on the table by the Blue Ribbon panel, registration fees, indexing the gas tax, sales tax, and even tolling, all need to be considered. Before we raise anyone's taxes or increase anyone's fees, we need to critically look at the scope of the problem and understand exactly what the dollar signs associated with it are. $900 billion is an awful lot of money, and if there are economies that could alter that money, the size of that number, we need to pursue that. But we need to look at every possibility. The most frequently discussed seems to be the indexing of the gas tax. And maybe that's appropriate, but only in conjunction with economies and perhaps using, again, the prudent reserve, which seemingly should be tapped right about now. Thank you.
Next question directed first to Mr. Farrader.
Hi, my name is Sheila Landsberg, and in the last week they released DPI, the figures that said funding for schools has gone up, and it's gone up to like maybe, I don't know, 64% to 67%, something like that. But the commitment to fund 2/3 of funding has been taken away, was it 2008 or 2006? And Lodi continues to be a negative tertiary district where we get like about 30-some% of state revenue. What vision do you have for how public schools should be funded, and particularly districts like Lodi? What should we be doing? Because obviously the present funding formula is not working for us.
Exactly. The school funding formula needs to be revisited and adjusted, maybe reconstructed. There's nothing wrong with wiping the slate clean and starting fresh. Superintendent Evers has a plan that's been out for a couple of years called Fair Funding for the Future. And it has provisions for providing funds to school districts that come up short. And there's a variety of reasons for communities like Lodi that end up on the short end of the state funding flow. And it's unfair. We need to look at fair distributions for all of our communities. Rural schools also are under continual challenge, and although I like the number of 66 or 67%, I would challenge many of the rural school districts to agree with that number as it comes down. I don't think it's going to materialize across the board. So yes, we need to look at how we structure our revenue streams as directed to the schools. And we need to do that in recognition that public education is essential to our communities and to our society. It's one of the principal pillars of the middle class, and we cannot sacrifice it. And we cannot divert funds into private pockets. It needs to be public education first, always.
Again, when I was elected in 2008, the state, I would say, was in a little bit of a mess. There again, the previous administration took stimulus money, put it into K-12 education packages. That funding expired in 2010, leaving Wisconsin with a $2 million hole in federal funding for students. We have put more money back into education. Education is still, it's over 30% of the state budget, still the #1 priority in every biennium budget. Wisconsin is basically ranked recently as the 5th best school system in the nation according to a national report. That's based on a lot of criteria, students, teachers, ratios, scores, school safety. But yes, more needs to be done. And that's what the Rural Initiative Program was developed. Previously, since I've been elected, every session we gather, talk about funding formula. Other states say that we have the best one in the nation. They don't want us to change it, but we realize that there are things that need to be changed. Lodi, for example, property-rich community with the lake property, and the school district is suffering because of that. So that's something that we are looking at for the rural schools, and how do we address that without changing or throwing out the whole thing.
Next question directed to Mr. Rick.
I'm Robert Lee from the town of Dane. I asked Keith, when the Republicans are going to fight to blow up, just raise the gas tax 10 cents. It could be done in a month's time. No studying for another 6 months, and you guys are just pushing the problem off further.
Just a question, please.
I agree with you. There's, and that's why we want all options on the table. We have the infrastructures in place to move forward with.
My question is, when's it going to be done? You've been screwing around for a year now, for a couple of years. How long are you going to let it go on?
We're trying to get a consensus with my colleagues, and when we're getting there to the point where I think we've got the support in our house to get something done.
I've heard that for at least a year.
The governor's drawn lines in the sand.
Who cares about the government? You guys got power over it.
Mr. Lee.
What are you going to do?
Mr. Lee, please.
And that's why we have 3 branches of government. My branch of government, I think, is going to do our job.
I understand
We're
that.
hoping the other 2 branches do their job.
So what's the problem? You guys don't want to do it. You're afraid of the governor.
I'm not afraid of the governor. I've been battling the governor for the last 4 years on transportation issues.
Nothing's been done, though.
Thank you.
We have to build consensus, and that's what I've been working on with my colleagues.
Yeah, I've heard that for long.
Mr. Farrer.
The roads are going to hell.
Well, I'd like to say, elect me, and we'll do it next week, but the fact of the matter is that the legislature is what it is. I would be a strong, clear voice for appropriate funding for transportation, and an immediate answer might be indexing the gas tax. Certainly, everything is in place to do that fairly easily, and quite quickly. But as Representative Rip pointed out, it will take consensus. I certainly would advocate for consensus to solve our transportation problem, and raising the gas tax can be an element to that. I think for a long-term sustainable solution, we need probably some other things as well. We may need to look at our fee structure. We may need to look at the economies that might be available. But to base fund transportation, we need a broad base input, and perhaps that would be the most available one. That's not to say that a sustainable plan wouldn't be adjustable over time. People are fond of saying that once you raise a tax, it never goes back, but that's not necessarily true. So raising the gas tax as an interim solution might be something to be looked at as well.
Next question directed first to Mr. Farrader. Mr. Roach.
I don't.
You waive your question, sir?
Well, I don't want to ask George a question.
Okay. Mr. Farrader, question to George Farrader first. They'll both answer.
We seem to be caught up on education.
Identify yourself, please, sir.
Barry Bufeld from Partyville. We seem to be caught up on transportation and education. I'm also concerned with bringing jobs to our state, bringing jobs back to our state. What can we do about this?
Last night I had the privilege of attending a dinner meeting of the Rio Community Club, which is a business-focused group in the community of Rio. And the keynote speaker was a regional economic planner. And he was pretty clear. There are opportunities for the state of Wisconsin. We need to work within our communities, and we need to work between our communities to cooperate, to take advantage of the economic development programs that exist. I think it behooves every business locally to work with their community leaders. It behooves community leaders to work with other community leaders, whether it be within the Wisconsin League of Municipalities or the Towns Association, to look at what's available to facilitate industrial economic growth by any means in their community. There are some model communities. We look at Fall River in Columbia County, which has for many years had a long-range plan to encourage growth, and it's grown quite nicely and has a good base of both light and medium industry and other types of job-creating economic activities. So there is a way forward. We need to keep our sons and daughters here in Wisconsin. We need to keep our sons and daughters working locally, and we can do that.
3 million more people are employed in 2016 than at any point in the history of the state. We've got over 35,000 new jobs were added in 2015. Unemployment rate, as I mentioned earlier, lowest since March of 2001. Seventh highest in May 2016 labor force participation rate in the nation. Sixth highest private sector wage growth in the United States at 7.1 in 2015. There's been over 28,000 new net new business filings between December 2014 and March of 2016. George mentioned, I was at the meeting last night too, the dinner. Sat in meetings with them already at the MadRep. MadRep was Virant, containing local counties in the Madison area. Basically, we need to, and his message was, we need to use each other, leverage each other, because we're dealing in global markets. And we have to realize that we're dealing with global markets. Look at Alcar, for an example, in Lodi here. The number of jobs and the equipment they build, and where does that go? It goes to other states, goes out of state, other countries. So we are dealing with global markets. We need to recognize that and keep moving in that direction.
Next question directed first to Mr. Rick.
I read in your community voice, you were touting the Wisconsin Rural Initiative. So I did a little research, and I found an interesting provision that you are, in this initiative, are for giving up to $30,000 in loans for teachers. Isn't that a tacit admission that when you did Act 10, you created, manufactured a teaching shortage? Particularly in rural areas like your own.
Well, I would disagree with you. I've got family members that are even going into the teaching profession yet. Now, I have heard that recently the numbers are down for applications, and maybe Vince could even jump in on that one, if you'd like, but...
They are.
So people are looking at other avenues, other job opportunities. The private sector is doing well, paying better probably. But these are things that we realize in the rural areas, and rural is very different than the urban areas. We've got certain areas that have the tech ed programs, VOAG programs. Those are critical to those areas, and we need to keep teachers and trainers in those areas teaching those kids, because that's what those kids are interested in for the most part. And it also, in the long run, like tech ed programs, it helps these kids learn skills. Also moves into apprenticeship programs for the kids that school districts need to work on. Businesses need to partner with those school districts also. So I would say, and that was the one program that was signed into law. It also helps them retain good teachers. And there's more to the rural initiative, so we're hoping that, my goal is at the beginning of next session that all these programs move forward, all the legislation that we...
So your rural, this initiative
Mr. Rudy,
does not apply to all
Mr. Rudy,
teachers.
the format is one question, he answers, and Mr. Farrader answers. You can ask again later. Thank you. Mr. Farrader, you have 90 seconds, sir.
So, yes, we know that in the wake of Act 10, the teacher pipeline has been throttled. And as a consequence of provisions within those legislative activities, the teacher marketplace has become more competitive for certain specialties, which has tended to lure certain specialties away from perhaps places of prior employment to more lucrative communities that can pay higher. That's unfortunate because it's created an imbalance in the quality of our education, particularly in the rural areas. Now, I won't speak against any plan that helps teachers with a reimbursement program for their student loans. Programs like that should be expanded to embrace all teachers, not just rural teachers. Certainly, there can be incentives to keep teachers in rural areas where they otherwise might leave. And I like the idea of such incentives because we need to ensure that we have a uniform quality of public education across the state, whether it be in rural areas or not. That's a requirement of our state constitution, and we need to maintain that. Thank you.
Next question directed to Mr. Farrader first.
Since Governor Walker took office, we've seen a decline in wages for the middle class and continual attacks on wages, including the prevailing wage. Act 10, it was previously mentioned, damaged wage situations dramatically. We're second in the Midwest for people leaving the state, followed only by Illinois. And we have to have some, depending on your source, between 40 and 70% of the economy is driven by the wealth of the middle class and their ability to spend money. Nothing is being done currently to enhance that situation, and I want to know what's going to happen should one of you get elected.
Well, there's no doubt that the middle class is the principal pillar in our society, and without the middle class, we don't have the society that we've known throughout our lives. We need to encourage economic activity that creates and perpetuates well-paying jobs. Enacting legislation that undercuts wages is ultimately not productive. We cannot look forward to a Wisconsin of the sort that we've known if we continue to degrade the possibilities at the entry level and for wage-earning jobs. That said, the answer is not an easy one. I can say right out of the gate that inhibiting the unions is not the right way to go. We don't want to undercut salaries. The wage earners are the base of the economy. The paychecks that are brought home buy the local products, buy the food, keep the businesses open. So it becomes self-defeating if we undercut wages. So we need to ensure that does not happen, whether or not it means reinforcing the minimum wage or perhaps enhancing our union rights. Either of those can be considered. Thank you.
Certainly, the minimum wage was never intended to be a living wage. It's considered a starting wage for over half of all individuals 25 years and under, according to the Census Bureau. Advantages and disadvantages to the minimum wage. Positive, workers are going to earn more take-home money. Now they argue that $15 is a good starting point. Chances are, if they're on an assistant program, that $15 isn't going to be enough, so let's take it higher yet. Negative, fewer jobs as employers. There's going to be, people are getting laid off. These are good starting positions for kids to learn a work ethic. Part of our problem in today's world, we hear from employers, is that they either haven't been trained, a lot of times in work ethics, showing up on time, all those types of things. That's why going through apprenticeship programs, support those very much. I think it gets those kids out into the real world, exposes them to, whether it's business or Lodi or anywhere, that they get to see what's happening out there, find a career path that they choose. They may or may not have to go to college. A lot of times businesses are providing training and paying for their education. Also, there's a two-tier system plan that's been floated out there. I'd like to hear more about that and see what that system will do in the workplace. Thanks.
Next question directed first to Mr. Ripp.
Thank you. Allison Seaton from Keith. On April 7, 2011, Keith Ripp signed a secret non-disclosure agreement to redistrict Wisconsin, which assured that he, Luther Olson, Glenn Groveman, and all the other Republicans could never be voted out of office. That agreement to redistrict ensures that Republicans will always win every election with only 40% of the vote. To be more precise, that means that for many of the people in this room, your vote does not count. So would you please explain why you signed the agreement?
Wisconsin is one of 37 states that assist assign redistricting to state legislators. So around 75% of our states in the nation have the same process. Certainly don't support the Iowa model, and I've talked to folks I know in Iowa. The process is isolated from public engagement. There's no public scrutiny or accountability for the public to go back on. Their nonpartisan board draws lines, has no accountability to anyone, because they're appointed, not elected. The Iowa model has never been replicated in any other state. They do not follow the same federal standards like Wisconsin, especially with communities of interest, population areas such as Milwaukee. They don't have those areas. Statistically, the Iowa model has not produced more competitive legislative races than was like in Wisconsin. And most academics and experts in redistricting and reform agree that to this day, Iowa's system is more widely admired than copied, because other states do not share their unusual similarities in population and balance, the geography and stuff. Now, we have been, actually my staff in my office is doing a paper on redistricting. And it does use some of the Iowa things. And we're hoping to see that finished and move forward with that. Because I think that's a better model than what we have currently. Thanks.
The secrecy attendant with the development of the maps that were put into law by Act 43 in 2011 flew in the face of Wisconsin's tradition of open government. Quite candidly, what happened in the promulgation of that plan was reprehensible. And the legislators need to account for that to the citizens of the state. That said, redistricting remains a paramount problem. At a forum in Lodi a week or so ago, which my opponent elected not to attend, the question of redistricting came up, and I spoke to it as one of the most compelling problems that the state of Wisconsin has. It's an overarching problem because it affects every citizen, regardless of your partisan affiliation. And under the current rules and the current maps, individuals' right to express themselves as a voter is degraded. It's not a one person, one vote situation. It's a situation where politicians selected their voters, not the voters selecting the politician. And quite candidly, that's wrong. Now, arguably, the Iowa model has problems. It's not a cure-all or a be-all or end-all. It's just one thing that needs to be looked at. We can come up with nonpartisan redistricting that's unique to Wisconsin. This is Wisconsin after all. Thank you.
Next question directed to Mr. Farrer initially.
I'm Dan Rowe from Forest. A few weeks ago, we had a candidate forum, and only one side of the ticket, only the Democrats chose to attend to go along with this redistricting. Do you feel not attending a forum is adequate representation of the constituents of the community?
Well, I'm in the happy situation of having attended that forum, so I can talk to that directly. In a representative democracy, dialogue and debate is essential. Whether or not you are on the winning side, it's necessary for the voters to see what the alternatives are. And without forums and debates that have both sides of the argument represented, the voters lose. And that's analogous to the redistricting. It's related to the redistricting. Again, this is a representative democracy. It doesn't exist with only one side. And in our current situation, with a single party controlling all the levels of government in Madison, the possibility of debate in general is stifled. And we see that at the community forum level. To me, it seemed an act of arrogance, if you will, that one side collectively elected not to show up at that forum because it was an important event, and it was well attended by the citizens of DeForest. They deserved to have both sides of the argument put on the table, and the citizens lost because only one side showed up. Thank you.
So last 2 years ago, we had the LodiForum and we had the DeForest Forum. Same day. Convenience sake, worked out, whatever. When I had gotten an email, I had responded that those dates did not work for me. We had previously family things scheduled, and so I asked them to push it back, and they didn't give us any other dates. So that was their, I guess, their choice.
What about the other legislators?
I don't know what his conflict or what he had in his scheduling, I don't know.
Next question directed first to Mr. Rick.
I'm Bill Welch from Lodi. Wisconsin is a state that imports trainload after trainload of coal and oil to produce energy. What are your thoughts about ending the state's addiction to coal and moving to a more sustainable energy future?
Well, like I mentioned, the 42nd Assembly District is probably one of the greenest. Support some of those initiatives, but they also have to be feasible. When we look at, we want good jobs, good economies in our district, we also have to support manufacturers. Their number one cost is energy. And so we need to have affordable energy rates, even for the middle class, lower class, all the classes. The more we've taken out of their pockets because of energy costs, we're going to be hurting them. And we also need to have, talking with employers, their number one cost is energy. And it's unbelievable what some of them spend on energy and stuff. Am I concerned about the environment? Always. As a farmer, I deal with the environment every day. So we care about what happens out there, and that's all I got on that one.
So, yes, District 42 in Columbia County in particular does have some green energy resources. I think it's worth pointing out, since we're quick to blame the previous administration for the hole in the transportation budget, that the renewable energy features that we have in Columbia County largely extend from initiatives that began during that previous administration. So yes, we have windmills, and we have other clean energy activities going on, which is fine and wonderful. But we also have Columbia Station, which is a very large coal-burning power plant. And Columbia Station is an emitter. It's a polluter. There's no doubt about it. Clean coal it's not just an oxymoron, it's a lie. I come from the energy industry. I spent many years building and operating nuclear power plants before I started building big diesel engines. And I'm well aware of the problems that are imposed by burning coal. The other thing we need to consider here in District 42 is the transit of dirty energy. We have coal trains and oil trains rolling through our district night and day. 28 trains through Doylestown, and many of them are oil trains, which represent a singular hazard, and we need to contain that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your questions. That concludes the question and answer segment, and we'll now proceed to the closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to present a closing statement, and Mr. Ripp was the first with the opening statement, so Mr. Farrader will be first with the closing statement. Mr. Farrader.
Thank you, and I'd like to begin my closing statement with a reiteration of my thanks. My thanks to the optimists for hosting this event. My thanks to Lodi High School for providing this wonderful facility. And above all, thanks to everyone who has attended. As I mentioned a moment ago, it's essential for citizens of a representative democracy to participate in debate and discussion, and there's no better way than forums of this type. So why elect George Farrader? I represent a clear and articulate voice that will advocate for the citizens of Wisconsin for good roads, for good and well-funded schools, for local control and protections of local control, for clean water, clean well water, clean surface water, and to protect the care provided to our veterans. It's unfortunate that the veterans question wasn't asked. As a veteran, that's close to my heart, and we've seen funds that should be directed to veterans care that came home diverted for other reasons, which is something that as citizens we can't stand for. So, I stand before you as a candidate, hoping to earn sufficient votes to get elected to the State Assembly. And in the State Assembly, I offer to be that clear and articulate voice for the people of Wisconsin in the public policy matters that matter most to us as citizens, to do the most good for the most people. Thank you.
Well, again, I'd like to say thank you also to the Optimist and the school for hosting the event, and also for folks coming out. Like my siblings and myself and my 3 children, we all graduated from Lodi High School as a product of public education. I truly understand how important it is that we continue to invest in our schools and give each and every student the tools to succeed. Since 2002, Wisconsin school funding has increased 30.4%, but we will still need to make sure our school districts, especially those in the rural Wisconsin areas, are supported. I am determined to ensure all children throughout the state have received an outstanding education from excellent teachers. As a 3rd-generation farmer, I learned firsthand the importance of agriculture in Wisconsin. It continues to be one of Wisconsin's leading industries, contributing an impressive $88 billion to our economy. In addition to the farm, I also own a trucking business. Both of my businesses show me every day how truly vital our state's infrastructure is to Wisconsin's growing economy. There is no greater issue facing the legislature than finding a long-term solution to our transportation funding crisis. The problem exists because of the $1.3 billion raid from the fund since 2003. My colleagues and myself were able to constitutionally protect the fund against future raids. That was some piece of legislation I proposed and it passed. We take that very seriously, amending the Constitution. We also I will also continue to work tirelessly with my constituents, local leaders, businesses, and my colleagues to develop a plan for Wisconsin's future. And by the sounds of it, we agree on a lot of things, a lot of the issues. So I guess we both know the district pretty well. Also proud to be from rural Wisconsin. There's no greater privilege than to serve the hardworking citizens of the 42nd Assembly District. Take great pride in working for you, and I believe that I'm the best candidate to represent you in the 42nd Assembly District. So I ask for your vote on November 8th. Thank you.
And thank you to both of you, Mr. Farrader and Mr. Rick. How about a round of applause?